Putin grants Edward Snowden Russian citizenship. The U.S. reacts to protests in Iran. And Canada drops their border vaccine mandate. That and more on this week's headlines. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. This week, Putin granted Russian citizenship to Edward Snowden. Snowden was charged in 2013 for violating the Espionage Act by leaking highly classified information to the press while he was working as a subcontractor working for the National Security Agency. He leaked this information because he felt the U.S. government was violating the Constitution by spying on citizens. Snowden fled to Russia, but says he would like to return to the U.S. someday. And by someday, he means whenever they won't arrest me on sight. That would put quite a damper on the homecoming. Russia gave Snowden permanent residency in 2020. He applied for citizenship shortly after that. And why was it granted? Because if there's anyone who appreciates whistleblowers that stand up against shady authoritarian spying, it's Vladimir Putin. He loves strong-willed people with spines. Wait, I said that wrong. He loves having strong-willed people thrown out of windows and breaking their spines. So why did he grant Snowden Russian citizenship? My guess is petty revenge. The U.S. often criticizes Putin for human rights violations, so someone who called out the U.S. for violating rights is A-OK in Putin's book. Meanwhile, Putin, being the kind of guy who cares about human rights, has threatened to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Gee, I wonder why the U.S. would ever criticize Putin over human rights violations. The U.S. warned Russia against following through on this nuclear suggestion. A stern suggestion met by a warning made by people who do a terrible job representing the people they're supposed to look out for. Is this a war or a homeowners association meeting? If Ukraine doesn't let me take part of their backyard, I'm going to nuke this whole block. Speaking of horrible human beings that have no decency whatsoever, the airline industry. President Biden proposed a new rule that would make airlines disclose all fees up front, without any surprise fees being tacked on later. According to a statement from the White House, under the proposed rule, airlines and travel search websites would have to disclose up front, the first time an airfare is displayed, any fees charged to sit with your child, for changing or canceling your flight, and for checked or carry-on baggage. They're going to force airlines to be honest and transparent. That's terrible. Has anyone thought how this is going to affect Spirit Airlines? Their whole model of business is hidden costs. If people knew that their tickets were only the cheapest because they make it up by nickel and diming you for every carry-on bag, to glasses of water, to blinking more than twice per minute, then no one would ever fly with them. They'd go out of business. Maybe that's why it's taking JetBlue so long to buy Spirit Airlines. Even the company itself is full of hidden costs. I wish I knew what Spirit Airlines had to say about all this. Unfortunately, they wanted to charge me $30 to see their statement. More after the break. Welcome back. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said that the U.S. is capitalizing on protests in the country to try and weaken Iran's stability and security. In response to this, the U.S. said, duh, are you new or something, Iran? This wouldn't even be the first time the U.S. did that in Iran. This would be like accusing Yogi Bear of attempting to swipe picnic baskets. How are you surprised? In case anyone from the Iranian regime is watching this, that was a joke. The protesters in Iran center around the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who died in police custody in Tehran earlier this month. She had been arrested by the morality police for allegedly wearing her headscarf improperly. Officials say she had a sudden stroke and died of heart failure. But many accuse them of lying, including Amini's father, who said, "My son was with her. Some witnesses told my son she was beaten in the van and in the police station. My son begged them not to take her, but he was beaten too. His clothes were ripped off. I asked them to show me the body cameras of the security officers. They told me the cameras were out of battery." Wow. Iran's morality police are so dedicated to their jobs, they even want the deaths of the women they've killed to be covered up. Protests have spread across Iran, with women removing their headscarves in protest, which is a crime in Iran. But the Iranian regime is cracking down. As of this recording, at least 83 protesters have been killed by Iranian security forces, according to human rights groups, many of them young women. Authorities say only 41 have been killed and claim the majority agrees with their rules. And plus, these are just rioters anyway. Meanwhile, Iranian activists are calling on the U.S. to stop supporting the Iranian regime, especially the Iranian nuclear deal.
The Iranian regime have their own lobbyists, apologists. They're all over around the world just trying to convince the West to get a nuclear deal. But I'm here to echo the voice of Iranian people within the society, actually asking a simple demand that while we're getting killed in Iran, stop negotiating with our murderers. Cut off all your ties with the Islamic Republic.
Well, the U.S. didn't do that. But in response to the protests, the Biden administration has put sanctions on Iran's morality police. The Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets said in a statement, these officials oversee organizations that routinely employ violence to suppress peaceful protesters and members of Iranian civil society, political dissidents, women's rights activists, and members of the Iranian Baha'i community. So essentially, the U.S. is accusing Iran of human rights violations. You know what that means? Might not be long before Iranian officials invite Edward Snowden to become a citizen of Iran. And after the break, Coolio has passed away. Welcome back. Rapper Coolio, famous for his 90s mega hit Gangsta's Paradise, died on Wednesday. Police opened an investigation, but there's no foul play suspected. Coolio's manager says it was likely a heart attack. He's survived by 6 children. The family lawyer will read over his will to determine how he wanted to bequeath his power and the money and the power, minute after minute, hour after hour. At the beginning of September, new COVID boosters were rolled out that are more effective against the dominant Omicron variant strain, BA.5. According to the White House COVID response coordinator, for the first time since December of 2020, our vaccines have caught up with the virus. 90% of Americans now live within 5 miles of providers that give out these boosters for free. But despite this, less than 2% of people eligible for it have gotten this booster. I'm shocked. That's what I would say if the messaging on boosters hadn't been so baffling. Or if last week President Biden didn't literally say the pandemic was over. This would be like if McDonald's was surprised no one wanted to eat their Beyond Meat Big Macs when their commercials never told anyone they were selling Beyond Meat Big Macs, and Ronald McDonald came out and said all the McDonald's were closed. Speaking of COVID, Canada dropped their vaccine mandate at the border, as well as the requirement to wear masks on planes. Spirit Airlines responded to this by saying wearing masks on a flight will now cost $30, and not wearing a mask will also cost $30. Many feel it's about time these mandates were dropped. As I've been saying for years now, the biggest threat to people visiting Canada isn't COVID. It's moose with ice skates strapped to their antlers. Speaking of natural disasters, Hurricane Ian made landfall on Florida's southwest coast on Wednesday as a Category 4 storm with winds reaching 150 miles per hour. Grocery stores were cleaned out in preparation for the hurricane. Although this isn't really big news in Florida, since people going wild in supermarkets and hoarding alcohol is a daily occurrence there. Ian caused massive flooding and knocked out the power for more than 2.5 million residents. As of this recording, at least 4 people are confirmed dead, but the numbers could go much higher. President Biden approved a disaster declaration which would provide federal funding and other aid to affected Florida counties. And was Florida scared? If you think so, then you don't know Florida. Millions of Floridians were advised to evacuate, but many chose to stay in place and hunker down, probably because hurricanes are only like the 20th most terrifying thing about living in Florida. Unless it's an alligator swinging a machete while high on bath salts, I ain't going nowhere. Despite the damage that was unleashed, I know Florida will persevere. Many Floridians even saw this as a chance to throw a party. Because for most other places, the day a hurricane comes to your state is the most traumatizing day of your life. But for Florida, it's just another Wednesday. So what do you think about these stories that we covered this week? Leave your comments below. And be sure to support America Uncovered by going to patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Contribute $1 or more per episode. We rely on your support to help us keep making great episodes. Or join our exclusive censorship-free social media community on Locals. Check out AmericaUncovered.locals.com. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.